Republican Congressman Ed Royce of California chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and right now he's leading a bipartisan congressional delegation in Ukraine. He literally just landed from a visit to the country's eastern border with Russia and joins us from the phone from Kiev. Congressman Royce, thank you so much for being on the program. I want to ask you right off the bat, what were your initial observations of the eastern part of Ukraine? Is it a country under occupation?
What surprised me in our discussions with people in every ethnic community there and in among the religious minorities that we talked to as well, was the anticipation of the election on May 25th. We saw no evidence of attempts to disrupt that election. As a matter of fact, we saw full support for the government in Ukraine by the minority groups that we talked to, as well as by the Russian-speaking population in the area. We talked to political leadership, but also representatives of civil society, and frankly, where we were, which is a thoroughly Russian-speaking region, they very much resented what they felt were Soviet, or I should say Russian special forces that had been sort of brought into eastern Ukraine. They didn't see much indication of support other than by a political fringe for this type of activity on the part of the Russian forces that were operating in the east. And so I think that election is going to see a high turnout with a great deal of support for a new government in Ukraine.
So from your reading of the situation on the ground, do you feel then that the general population is not being necessarily receptive to that Russian propaganda that has been spewed out across the eastern area? They are in fact supportive of the central government in Kiev?
When I raised with the Russian-speaking population these stories, they smile and they say, that's just propaganda. It is not true. What is on the Russian-speaking, language stations that is being broadcast in from Moscow, they say it is not true, that the problems are created by special forces, Russian special forces on the ground, and so they intend to go to the polls and, elect their local representatives. And they support independence for Ukraine. They were very, very vocal about it.
And you have been supportive of tougher sanctions. Obviously, the vice president is in Ukraine today. How much tougher can the sanctions be, considering Europe is so dependent upon Russian energy?
Well, it's going to depend upon the next steps that Russia takes. Clearly, in the agreement that Russia has concurred with in Geneva, what they're supposed to do now is ratchet down the tensions. Obviously, if Russian troops were to come over the border, regular army, the result of that would be international isolation of Russia, the types of sanctions that would frankly collapse their stock market, destroy their currency. I think that is understood. I think what the vice president is saying is that, Russia has now agreed to a deal. Since we haven't seen enforcement, we're going to start ratcheting up the pressure in order to make certain that we see some results from Moscow.
Chairman Ed Royce of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe.